up. But white rage actually, in my head, began germinating long before that. It began germinating in February 1999, when Amadou Diallo, a young black man, steps out of his apartment building in New York City. The NYPD roll up on him and fire 41 bullets. 19 of them hit. Amadou, of course, went down, because that's what 19 bullets do to you. Amadou had no weapon. He had no criminal charge. He was just a man who had been at work all day and wanted to go get something to eat. And for that, he was gunned down because he was black. Now, that was bad enough. But then it was watching Mayor Rudy Giuliani on Ted Koppel's Nightline talking about this, and he barely mentions Amadou Diallo's name. It's like he didn't even exist. Instead, what Rudy Giuliani talked about was how well his policies were working, how New York was a much safer city.
You know me from Nick and Diasporans, and I'm glad to be here today with Evans.
Yes, today we are going to discuss white rage, and white rage, how it affects black people in the United States of America. Remember, this is both a reaction channel, a commentary channel, and an educational channel, you know. We learn, we educate ourselves, and then we become self-aware. There is a concept that is called white rage. The concept of white rage originates from the author's reflection on systemic racism, which was triggered by the killing of Amadou Diallo in 1999. Now, this author, who is also the professor with whom we are going to have a commentary on, shows her frustration, and she reveals that her frustration grew as public discourse ignored the victims of racism, focusing instead on political success and crime statistics.
So basically, white rage comes from when you see black people excelling. So the white people have put themselves in a position that they be known as superior. But
yes.
Here comes an instance where the black people are excelling in many scopes, in the government, in the judicial courts, in businesses. And the white people are not happy about this.
Yes, anger is being aroused by the success they see from the black counterparts. Yeah. And this is what this specific woman is saying. And remember, we are going to listen to what she's got to say, and then we shall get back and we shall share with you our thoughts, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
Yes. What I'd like to do is to kind of give you an overview of how I got to white rage, and then read a couple of excerpts from the book, and then open it up for Q&A. And so, white rage began with an op-ed that I did for the Washington Post as Ferguson blew up. But white rage actually, in my head, began germinating long before that. It began germinating in February 1999, when Amadou Diallo, a young black man, steps out of his apartment building in New York City. The NYPD roll up on him and fire 41 bullets. 19 of them hit. Amadou, of course, went down, because that's what 19 bullets do to you. Amadou had no weapon. He had no criminal charge. He was just a man who had been at work all day and wanted to go get something to eat. And for that, he was gunned down because he was black. Now, that was bad enough. But then it was watching Mayor Rudy Giuliani on Ted Koppel's Nightline talking about this, and he barely mentions Amadou Diallo's name. It's like he didn't even exist. Instead, what Rudy Giuliani talked about was how well his policies were working, how New York was a much safer city, how crime had gone down, and he had his flip charts showing that his policies were working. And I'm thinking, Your policies don't work if an unarmed man is gunned down, and then you've got 41 bullets coming at him. But that didn't seem to resonate. But I've got something back in here going, there's something going on. And then as a scholar, I continue to work, continue to write, continue to think, continue to work, and then boom, August 2014. And I'm watching TV, and Ferguson is on fire. And it didn't matter what station I turned to, whether it was MSNBC, CNN, or even Fox. They were all saying the same thing. They were talking about black rage. Look at black folks burning up where they live. Why do black people burn up where they live? Now, depending then on the station, you got the question of, what is wrong with black people? Or you got the, oh, black people. But whatever it was a thing about black rage. But there I was. And then I realized I'm shaking my head because I'm seeing shoulder to shoulder, shoulder to shoulder. And I said, no, what we're really dealing with here is not black rage. What we're really dealing with here is white rage. And then I went, whoa. Because then it was like that moment when it began to crystallize. I had lived in Missouri. I taught at the University of Missouri for 13 years. So I had lived in Missouri for a while, and I saw the way that public policy systematically eroded African Americans' access to their basic citizenship rights. Things like, Ferguson is 67% black. You had a 6% turnout rate in the 2013 municipal election. Black turnout rate. 67% of the population is black, 6% turnout rate for African Americans in the 2013 election. You got to do some kind of incredible policy tweaking, twerking to turn 67% down to 6%. And they did. Ferguson. The school system where Michael Brown went to school had been on probation for 15 years. Let me explain what probation means in Missouri. Missouri has a scale that, okay, so you get so many points for graduation rate, you get so many points for AP, you get so many points for da-da-da, so many points for da-da-da. A school system can get 140 points. Michael Brown's school system got 10 for 15 years. So we have a system that is really cool with taking an entire generation of black children through a school system that can only garner 10 points a year, and then have another slew coming in. 15 years at 10. Policy. The police force in Ferguson did not believe it was there to protect and serve. It looked at that black population as revenue generators who brought in about 25% of the operating budget for the city of Ferguson, which means you stop folks all the time. You didn't turn on your turn signal when you changed that lane. That didn't look like a full stop. You were going 5 miles over the speed limit. Now, understand that while the police are doing this, they're also letting whites go. So you've got disparate policing here. This is what's going on in Ferguson, but that's not what you saw in the narrative that was coming out. Instead, it's like, whew, look at black folks burning up where they live. Well, I'm into policy. I study policy. And I started looking at this saying, okay, what we have here is that in the United States, you kind of think about the kind of society that we are. We like the spectacular. We like the pew. And we have paid so much attention to the flames that we've missed the kindling. We see the eruption, but we don't see all that made that eruption possible. So what I set out to do in that Washington Post op-ed was to make white rage visible, to basically blow graphite onto a fingerprint and trace, because this is the other thing. This is an ahistorical nation in so many ways. We see the now, but we don't see how we got here. And I'm a historian. So I took us back to the Civil War and Reconstruction and moved us all the way up through Obama. But you know, you can only do so much in a 1,000-word op-ed. And so I then turned White Rage, that op-ed, into a book. One of the pieces that I began to work through was that white rage is often invisible. It's invisible because it isn't about violence. Often when we think about racism or racial violence, or we're thinking about the Klan burning a cross somewhere. White rage works through the courts. It works through the legislatures in passing laws. It works through city councils and school boards in those very boring meetings where all kinds of things are being decided about school districts, about gerrymandering voting districts. White rage is often invisible and cloaked in the shawl of respectability. And what I also began to understand is that for white rage, it's not the mere presence of blackness, the mere presence of black people that provoke this incredible sense of angst and anger that comes through in policies. Instead, it's black advancement, black progress, black achievement that is the trigger for white rage. It's black people who refuse to accept their subjugation. It's black people who demand their rights. It's black people who aspire, who achieve. It's black people who refuse to give up. It's black people who are resilient. Now, think about the crazy dichotomy that is. Because what we are doing as a society is we are punishing black people via policy for achieving. In the land of opportunity, we are punishing black people for aspiring. And it sounds almost fantastical until you look at the history. Because how else do we explain how government after government after government has fought so hard to ensure that black children would not get a decent education? We see this coming out of slavery. We particularly see it in the road up to the Brown decision. After Brown, it was like, boom, we will shut down the entire school system before we'll see to it that black children get access to equal resources for a decent education. Think about all of the machinery, the legislative and judicial machinery that it took to shut down public school systems across the South, to ensure that black children would not get an education. But what they did was to use the tax money to fund vouchers, tuition payments for white students to go to white-only private academies, so that white children would continue to get educated using tax dollars that black parents were paying into those coffers, while black children sat out. Why? Because black children wanted to get an education. Think about that. Or, as we know, this nation has a war on drugs that has led to mass incarceration. And Michelle Alexander has laid that out beautifully in the new Jim Crow. African Americans, there's studies coming out of the University of Washington and out of Duke that show that African Americans use drugs the least and sell drugs the least of all racial and ethnic groups. So then you've got to ask yourself, now, self, yes, we do have those conversations. How is it that the group that is using drugs the least and selling drugs the least are arrested and incarcerated at 10 times the rate for others? How are we punishing most those who are doing it the least? So we're punishing folks for not using drugs and not selling drugs? We're decimating economies and communities that way? But yes, we are. Or think about, in a democracy, how we punish black people for voting. That just doesn't add up, does it? But that is what we have done as a society. We're living in this moment again right now because Obama had the audacity to believe he could be president. And you saw a wave of new voters in 2008 casting ballots. 15 million new voters, including 2 million new African American voters, 2 million new Hispanic voters, 600,000 new Asian American voters. And you also saw a wave of voters who make less than $15,000 a year coming out to the polls. Now, what we say as a democracy is that we want people to have a stake in this land. Because we know that a mass of alienated individuals, in fact, makes the nation creak and crumble. The nation loses its legitimacy. But when people have a stake in what's going on, you begin to have the kind of vibrancy that sustains a nation. But we have punished black people for voting. And understand that all of this was not done with burning a cross. This was done by the U.S. Supreme Court. This was done by the U.S. Congress. Systematically, methodically. And so I set out in the book to trace these key signposts of white rage. Reconstruction. In Reconstruction, you have this moment where 4 million freed people move from being property to being humans, then to being citizens. That is a seismic shift. You want to talk about advancement. Property to citizen. The apparatus of the state came up like nobody's business to quash that. One of those methods was the Black Codes that I talk about extensively in the book. Then there's the Great Migration. The Great Migration is that moment where 10% of the black population left the South. It was when they said, we control our own destiny. Yes, we control our own destiny. We want better jobs. We want good schools for our children. We want the right not to be lynched. And so we're out of here. And the response from the South was stopping the trains. Now remember, we're in the middle of a war. That's stopping the trains, banning the Chicago Defender. Don't we have the First Amendment? Then I also began to track the Brown decision. That's the third moment. Because here with Brown, the U.S. Supreme Court says separate and unequal has no place in American society. It is the thing that is supposed to drive the stake through the heart of Jim Crow. Instead, you got massive resistance, where you have over 100 congressmen and senators signing an oath, basically, that they will resist the Supreme Court's ruling with everything that they have. You get states like Virginia that begin to put the mechanisms in place to shut down the public school systems. In Prince Edward County, for instance, in Virginia, they shut down the school system for 5 years. I want you to kind of think about that. You're in the 5th grade. They shut down your school. You don't have a school until you're in the 10th grade. What have you lost in terms of education and learning from the 5th grade to the 10th grade? And remember, this is also at that time when the U.S.'s industrial economy is beginning to flip and is beginning to move to a knowledge-based economy. So what we have basically done is to conscribe a mass of people to destitution because we have refused to believe that they have a right to quality education. Then there's the civil rights movement that gives us the Southern strategy. And the Southern strategy has so much to do with the moment that we're in right now. And then there's Obama's election. And so those are the 5 signposts that I map out in White Rage and then walk us through the policies. And I look particularly at education, the criminal justice system, and the right to vote. So what I'd like to do right now is to read a few passages from it. Okay, yeah, I'm going to need my glasses on this one. And and this is one of the things. So with glasses, you need one set for reading and another one, so I'm going to be doing this. But after the Brown decision, as I said, there was massive resistance. And by the time we get, so Brown is 1954. Brown 2, which is the with all deliberate speed, is 1955. By 1972, we're still fighting. So you've already had another generation of children going through. In Texas, a group of parents in a neighborhood called the Edgewood District. Edgewood was 96% Mexican American and black. It was the poorest district in San Antonio. But they valued education for their children so much that they taxed themselves, their property, at the highest rate allowable in the state. And as we know, schools are funded via property taxes. overwhelmingly. But the value of your property has so much to do with public policy. Where the city's zoning laws will allow, for instance, the landfill. Because if your house is next to a landfill, I'm here to tell you, it doesn't have much value. Where the city is going to allow, say, liquor stores and not. When you begin to look at the ways that zoning laws work, you begin to see the effect and impact on property values. So they taxed themselves at the highest level and were able to generate $21 per capita. $21 per student. Now, Alamo Heights, which was a predominantly white neighborhood in San Antonio, taxed themselves at basically near the lowest rate. And they were able to generate over $300 per student by taxing themselves at nearly the lowest rate. While Edgewood taxing themselves at the highest gets to $21. The folks in Edgewood screamed foul. That having schools based on property taxes that are based on discriminatory policies inherently violates the Brown decision and equal protection under the law. In a March 1973 ruling, a 5-4 decision, and the 5 justices, 4 of them were Richard Nixon appointees, and 1 was an Eisenhower appointee. They ruled that there is no fundamental right to education in the Constitution, and that Texas's laws did not discriminate against all poor people in Texas. Now, Thurgood Marshall, whom, by the way, I love, Thurgood Marshall, his dissent is powerful. I'm going to read a piece of it. Fully recognizing the implications of Rodriguez, this is the Rodriguez decision. Justice Thurgood Marshall was apoplectic. More than 40% of black children 14 and under lived with families below the poverty line, as compared with about 10% of white children. Under those circumstances, Marshall feared African American children would not stand a chance. The decision, he wrote in his dissent, could only be seen as a retreat from a commitment to equality of educational opportunity, as well as an unsupportable capitulation to a system which deprives children of the chance to reach their full potential as citizens. He was simply dumbfounded that the majority would acknowledge the existence of widely disparate funding for schools across Texas, but then, instead of focusing on the cause of that disparity, clumsily pirouette to all of the state's supposed efforts to close the gaps. The issue, Marshall explained, is not whether Texas is doing its best to ameliorate the worst features of a discriminatory scheme, but rather whether the scheme itself is in fact unconstitutionally discriminatory. And he found it the height of absurdity that Texas could actually argue that there was no correlation between funding and school quality. And then from that faulty premise, deduce that there were no discriminatory consequences for the children of disadvantaged districts. And he was therefore equally unimpressed with Texas's tendency to parade before the justices stories of children who had excelled despite living in under-resourced districts as some sort of proof that funding was irrelevant. That a child could excel even when forced to attend an underfunded school with poor physical facilities, less experienced teachers, larger classes, and a number of other deficits compared with a school with substantially more funds, Marshall barked, is to the credit of the child, not the state. But Rodriguez placed the onus solely on the backs of the most vulnerable, while walling off access to the necessary resources for quality education, and played beautifully into the colorblind post-civil rights language of substituting economics for race, yet achieving a similar result. The simple truth was that by virtue of the sheer demographics of poverty, Rodriguez would have not only a disparate impact on African American children, but a disastrous one. I know, sobering. And you should, her face is up here, she's just like, oh, man. And that's how I felt when I was researching and writing this. There were times when I'm doing this. So the next one that I'd like to read to you deals with the war on drugs. It has been as effective as anything else in rolling back the gains from the civil rights movement in terms of access to equal protection under the law and voting rights. Now, and in the book, I kind of walk through very briefly how Michelle Alexander's, how she talks about what the court has done, its rulings, in terms of really creating a racially biased criminal justice system. And then I give an example. I'm going to talk about Tulia, Texas. Has everybody here heard of Tulia? Oh, okay. Taken together, those rulings allowed, indeed encouraged, the criminal justice system to run racially amok. And that's exactly what happened on July 23rd, 1999, in Tulia, Texas. In the dead of night, local police launched a massive raid and busted a major cocaine trafficking ring. At least that's how it was billed by the local media, which, after having been tipped off, lined up to get the best, most humiliating photographs of 46 of the town's 5,000 residents, handcuffed, in pajamas, underwear, and uncombed bed hair, being paraded into the jail for booking. The local newspaper, the Tulia Sentinel, ran the headline, "Tulia streets cleared of garbage." The editorial praised law enforcement for ridding Tulia of drug-dealing scumbags. Well, the raid was the result of an 18-month investigation by a man who would be named by Texas's Attorney General as Outstanding Lawman of the Year. Attached to the federally funded Panhandle Regional Narcotics Task Force based in Amarillo, about 50 miles away from Tulia. Tom Coleman didn't lead a team of investigators. Instead, he single-handedly identified each member of this massive cocaine operation and made more than 100 undercover drug purchases. He was hailed as a hero, and his testimony immediately led to 38 of the 46 being convicted, with the other cases just waiting in the clogged court system. Joe Moore, a pig farmer, was sentenced to 99 years for selling $200 worth of cocaine to the undercover narcotics agent. Kizzy White received 25 years, while her husband, William Cash Love, landed 434 years for possessing an ounce of cocaine. There's that face again. The case began to unravel, however, when Kizzy's sister, Tanya, went to trial. Coleman swore that she had sold him drugs. Tanya, however, had video proof that she was at a bank in Oklahoma City, 300 miles away, cashing a check at the very moment he claimed to have bought cocaine from her. Then another defendant, Billy Don Wafer, had timesheets and his boss's eyewitness testimony that Wafer was at work and not out selling drugs to Coleman. And when the Outstanding Lawman of the Year swore under oath that he had purchased cocaine from Ewell Bryant, a tall, bushy-haired man, only to have Bryant, bald and about 5'6", appear in court. It finally became clear that something was awry. Coleman, in fact, had no proof whatsoever that any of the alleged drug deals had taken place. There were no audio tapes, no photographs, no witnesses, no other police officers present, no fingerprints on the bags of drugs except his, no records. Over the span of an 18-month investigation, he never wore a wire. Now, he claimed to have written each drug transaction on his leg. I'm just saying, Lord, you can't make this up. But to have accidentally removed the evidence when he showered. Now, I say to you, I got to stop right there because we've got either two really bad things happening here. Either the man did not shower for 18 months, whoo, or he did a drug buy, wrote it down, showered, wiped it off, and went, oh, man. Then the next day, did a drug buy, showered, wiped it off. Oh, man. So we got two bad things happening here, neither of which really hit the level of plausibility. And I'm telling you, when I read that piece, I went, no, yeah. Additional investigation led to no corroborating proof of his allegations. And when the police arrested those 46 people and vigorously searched their homes and possessions, no drugs were found, nor were weapons, money, paraphernalia, or any other indications at all that the housewife, pig farmer, or anyone else arrested were drug kingpins. What was discovered, however, was judicial misconduct running rampant in the war on drugs in Tulia, Texas, with a clear racial bias. Coleman had accused 10% of Tulia's black population of dealing in cocaine. Based on his word alone, 50% of all black men in the town were indicted, convicted, and sentenced to prison. Randy Credico of the William Moses Kunstler Fund for Racial Justice called Tulia a mass lynching. Taking down 50% of a male black population like that, it's outrageous. It's like being accused of raping someone in Indiana in the 1930s. You didn't do it, but it doesn't matter. Because a bunch of Klansmen are on the jury and they're going to string you up anyway. But this wasn't 1930. It was the beginning of the 21st century. And a powerful civil rights movement had bridged those two eras. And, finally, what I'd like to do is the last reading, and then open this up for questions, is on the Obama era. Because Obama's victory unleashed white rage in ways that we didn't even think imaginable. So I deal a lot with the voter suppression, but there was also an incredible level of violence. And so I'm going to respectability or appropriate behavior doesn't seem to matter. If anything, black achievement, black aspirations, and black success are construed as direct threats. Obama's presidency made that clear. Aspirations and the achievement provide no protection, not even to the God-fearing. On June 17, 2015, South Carolinian Dylan Roof, a white, unemployed, 21-year-old high school dropout, was on a mission to take his country back. Ever since George Zimmerman had walked out of a courthouse a free man after killing Trayvon Martin, and a racially polarized nation debated the verdict, Ruth had looked to understand the history of America. Trolling through the internet, he stumbled across the Council of Conservative Citizens, the Tri-C, the progeny of the 1950s White Citizens Council that had terrorized black people, closed schools, and worked hand in hand with state governments to defy federal civil rights laws. Despite the group's avowed racist belief system, in the mid to late 1990s, as the Southern Poverty Law Center reports, the group boasted of having 34 members who were in the Mississippi legislature and had powerful Republican Party allies, including then Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott of Mississippi. By 2004, Mississippi Governor Haley Barbour, the chair of the Republican National Committee, and 37 other powerful politicians had all attended Tri-C events in the 21st century. Earl Holt III gave $65,000 to Republican campaign funds in recent years, including donations to the 2016 presidential campaigns of Rand Paul, Rick Santorum, and Ted Cruz. The Tri-C then enjoyed precisely the cachet of respectability that racism requires to achieve its own goals within American society. And its website of hatred and lies provided the self-serving education Dylann Roof so desperately craved. He drank in the poison of its message, got into his car, drove to Charleston, entered Emmanuel AME Church, and landed in a Bible study with a group of African Americans who were the very model of respectability. Roof prayed with them, read the Bible with them, thought they were so nice. Then he shot them dead, leaving just one woman alive so that she could tell the world what he had done and why. "You're taking over our country," he said, and he knew this to be true. Well, not even a full month after Dylann Roof...
So, beautiful people, we've now watched the video, we've understood, we've tried to understand what is white rage, and for many times, what we are told, what we are shown on the media, particularly the Western media, we are only shown the black rage, you know?
Sure.
This is because the black rage is tangible, the black rage is more visible, but unlike the white rage, which is invisible, white rage is the one which works in the government, it works in the hospitals, it works in the schools, it also works in these public institutions, you know.
So basically you can say that white rage is really the systemic racism.
Yes, yes.
Because it works in every aspect of the government,
yes,
all the institutions, be it the judicial systems, the education sector,
yes, the health center,
yep.
You know. The white rage exists over there, you know. And the writer, or rather if you want, the professor, she's both a professor and she's both an author, you know. She wrote the book, The White Rage, you know. Her name is Professor Carol Anderson. Explains deeply this concept of white rage. And as we promised, we did tell you we will share with you our deep critical analysis. And here is what we have for you. You see, the enduring struggle for racial justice in the USA is a complex tapestry woven within the threads of historical oppression, systemic inequalities, and deeply entrenched societal attitudes. You know, in her work, or rather in her book, in this video as well, White Rage, the Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, as explored by Dr. Carol Anderson, you know, the author delves into a potent and often overlooked force that has been consistently undermined, or rather that has consistently undermined progress towards racial justice and racial equality. The phenomenon white rage is a concept born from personal reflection and historical analysis, which illuminates the simmering resentment and reactive anger that emerge among the segments of the white population in response to black advancement and the dismantling of racial hierarchies. Understanding the genesis and the triggers and the consequences of white rage is crucial for comprehending the persistent racial divide that continues to plague American society. What can you say about all this, brother?
So basically, the main point here is that the white rage is as a result of the black advancement. So we see the black persons in the US and all over the world excelling in business. They excel in
Sports.
Even in sports, like the NBA.
In inventions.
Yeah, sure. Even in the even in the scholar world. So, and the white people are not happy about this.
Yes, and you know, they ain't happy because for a long time they have always ridden on the wave, they've driven on the wave of white privilege, of white supremacy. And now something comes up, something emerges that tries to challenge this white privilege and white supremacy. I'm telling you, they've got to react.
Sure.
You see,
yeah.
Newton puts it very well in his third law. Do you know the third law of Newton?
Action and reaction are equal and opposite.
Yes, action and reaction are equal forces, but opposite to each other.
Sure.
But reaction comes after action. You see? Now the action is the one which is being implemented by the blacks. We have Serena Williams, we have Tiger Woods, we have Muhammad Ali, we have Mike Tyson, we have Tyler Perry, we have Oprah Winfrey, we have
even Barack Obama.
Barack Obama, you know. We have so many. We have Dwayne Johnson, we have Ludacris, we have so many of them, you know. These are just but the few of black people who are making it big in USA, both in the Hollywood and other sectors. This is the action. The reaction now is to try and make things harder
for them to suppress their actions, to suppress their development and endeavors.
Yes.
Yeah.
You see how it's such a dirty game. Now let's continue with this, our analysis. Now, Dr. Carol Anderson, initial contemplation of white rage stemmed from the profound sense of injustice following the 1999 killing of Amadou Diallo, an unarmed black man, by New York City police officers. So the New York police officers gunned down Amadou Diallo. That was in 1999, and Dr. Carol Anderson places it that he was just a man who worked hard, and he was trying to find something to eat. Then he was gunned down. How many times was that?
I think 41 bullets.
19.
41 bullets were shot, but 19 got him.
Oh, 41 bullets, 19 got him.
Yeah.
And then was laid down, you know?
Imagine 41 bullets being shot at a person that is unarmed.
Because
simply because he's black.
Yeah, their crime is walking while black. You see, America is not built for black people.
Yeah.
The black people built America, but it's not really for black people. Today I see many black Americans thinking of going back to America. I even did a video of a young man. I once interviewed him. He was very he was very profound. He was very energetic on moving to Africa. He was even convincing other people to come. Now he's going back to the States. He's saying that Africans are prejudiced. But one thing I know is this: America is harder.
Just like how the Holy Scripture says concerning Israel, when the Lord had moved them from Egypt, the place of their suffering and slavery. But while on their way to Canaan, they fell hungry.
Yeah.
And some of them thought of going back to Egypt, saying that inasmuch as we were put in slavery there were some melons, some onions to eat and stuff. So
some pawpaw.
Yeah.
But now they're hungry and in the desert and they're stranded. Now they feel like going back over there, going back to enslavement. No. You see, a small situation should not deflect you from your main purpose of aiming at the main objective. You see, there's what we call false comfort. False comfort is when you are supposed to be earning 1 million shillings, and now someone has intercepted you and offered you 100,000 Kenya shillings. Because you've never earned even that 100,000 Kenya shillings, you still feel it's more. But if you continue a little further, you would have gotten to times 10 of that.
Sure.
You get it? And that is what is happening here. So this young man called Amadou Diallo was gunned down just because he's walking while black, you know? So this tragic event of 1999 served as a catalyst, you know, highlighting a recurring pattern where the focus of public discourse often shifted away from the experience of victims of racism towards concern about political stability and crime statistics. This deflection, Carol Anderson puts it, implicitly devalued black lives and perpetuated a narrative that marginalized the impact of systemic racism. Carol Anderson, the professor's frustration grew with each instance where the legitimate grievances of the black community were either ignored or framed as threats to the existing social order, laying the groundwork for the conceptualization of white rage as a powerful and often unspoken force. So instead of looking at Amadou Diallo as a victim, now they're starting to look at it as a crime statistic, just something which happened.
Yeah. Somebody has been gunned down, 41 bullets shot at him.
Yeah.
And here comes a representative praising his policies. Here comes a representative saying that his state is very secure. I mean, he doesn't even mention the victim of this police brutality and this systemic racism. But he goes on praising his policies, and this brings an aspect of hypocrisy and stuff.
I agree.
Yep.
And I agree because there's a book by George Orwell called Animal Farm. It's a very interesting book. Have you read the book?
No, I've seen it on the bookshelves.
It's a very interesting book. So in this book we have a group of animals. It's an animal farm. Eh? We have pigs, we have horses, we have chicken, and we have roosters, we have the sheep. We also have other animals, but these are the major animals over there. So one day the pigs come and tell these animals, we should take care of this farmer. You know, he's ruling us in a bad way. We should take him out and rule ourselves, you know. And I didn't tell you that the pigs were of two categories. We had black pigs and white pigs. And they were very fat. The farmer was taking good care of them. So they revolted and they went against the farmer, and the farmer had to run away. Maybe they did away with him. You understand? Maybe. After the farmer left, the two pigs, the pigs, not two, but the pigs and the other animals started to rule themselves, you know. They organized themselves. The roosters will be laying eggs so that we'll be having, the chicken will be laying eggs so that we'll be having eggs. The roosters will be croaking so that we wake up early and then we go and work hard. We don't wake up late. You horses, you'll be plowing. You cows will be giving us milk. You sheep will be giving us your wool to sleep on. If you don't want to sleep on the dirt anymore. 1 month passed and the pigs grew greedy, particularly the black pigs. They grew greedy. They didn't want to share the produce that was coming out of their hard work. What happens is that the pigs came, the black pigs came, and they said one thing which always sticks on my mind up to date. When asked, why are you doing this to us and we agreed we will be having equal share? Said, no, shut up. Don't you know all pigs here are equal? But some animals are more equal than others. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. Is there 1 plus 1 is more equal to 2? Is there an answer that is more equal that would not result? Okay, it does not make sense, but it still makes sense. So in America, all lives matter, but some lives matter more than others. George Orwell's book puts it very well of the state's hypocrisy. Yes. Now, let's continue with Dr. Carol Anderson's arguments on her book. You see, white rage manifests in tangible ways, particularly through public policies that systemically disadvantage African American communities. The examples of Ferguson, Missouri, following the fatal shooting of Michael Brown, underscores this point. While the incident itself sparked outrage and protest against police brutality, the underlying issues of low black voter count turnout, which, contrary to initial result, Carol Anderson argues that there was a symptom of systemic disenfranchisement and failing educational system within the community, which revealed deeper structural inequalities. So they also had cheating in the voting system.
Sure.
There is many black people who were shot, not only Amadou Diallo. We've had so many, even some unreported, I believe.
So like in Ferguson, they say it's 67% black, the population there.
Yeah.
But the voter turnout is below 10%. You see, it's like a matter of voter suppression.
Yes.
So that more blacks cannot, they should not, they will not.
Yep.
So that the voter counts of blacks may be low, that they may not, English in any language.
So that they may not have a voice, they may be suppressed.
Yeah.
You see, if black people vote, many of them, they vote against the regime.
Yeah, sure.
But the regime does not want someone to vote against it. So it will do what the regime would do, what any regime would want to do, and that is suppress the votes. And whose votes are being suppressed? The black Americans, you know? So the neglect of Michael Brown's school, according to the video by Carol Anderson, is indicative of a broader pattern of systemic neglect that has affected generations of black children, limiting their access to quality education and perpetuating cycles of disadvantage. This neglect, Carol Anderson persists, is not simply benign oversight, but rather a manifestation of white rage, a deliberate or implicit resistance to black involvement, advancement. You know? A central argument placed by Dr. Carol Anderson is the argument presented in the summary. The central argument, as told by Dr. Carol Anderson, in this book, White Rage. White rage is not triggered by the mere presence of black individuals, but rather by their progress and their refusal to accept a subordinate status. When African Americans achieve success, gain political power, or challenge the existing racial order, it can ignite a reactive anger among those who perceive this as a threat to their own privileged position. Sure. This anger, Dr. Carol Anderson contends, often translates into punitive policies designed to undermine black advancement. Historical examples are abound, where periods of black progress, such as Reconstruction, were met with violent backlash and the implementation of discriminatory laws intended to reassert white supremacy. The redirection of public funds away from black schools towards white institutions, as highlighted in the video. This exemplifies the intentional undermining of black educational opportunities. Yes.
So here we have schools where black students get learned, which are deprived of resources and fundings. You see, like that school which was closed for almost 5 years.
Yeah.
So a student is at grade 5, after 5 years, he's supposed to be at grade 10. So he has lost almost 5 years of academic progress, academic learning. So, and another policy, according to what you've just expressed, is the war on drugs.
Yeah.
Where the police,
the black people are the least, but they are reported 10 times, and they are the least who use and abuse. You know. So, a central tenet again in Carol Anderson's book White Rage is gleaned from the summary. As gleaned from the summary is this: reactive anger. Reactive anger is not triggered by the mere presence of black individuals, but rather by their progress. That one we've talked about. So Anderson's work, as summarized, also likely dissects the stark disparities within the American criminal justice system. Dr. Carol Anderson argues that the systemic punishment of black communities starkly contradicts statistical evidence regarding drug use and other criminal activities. The disproportionately high rates of incarceration of African Americans, despite data suggesting similar or even lower rates of drug use compared to other groups, are not in Anderson's analysis, you know, simply the result of objective law enforcement. Instead, White Rage likely persists that these disparities are fueled by underlying racial biases that led to harsher treatment, more frequent arrests, and more severe penalties for black individuals within the legal system. Furthermore, Dr. Carol Anderson likely examines the moments of increased black political participation, such as the surge in the black voter turnout in 2008 presidential election of Barack Obama. You know, black people were suppressed, but he still won, you know?
yeah, sure.
So there is so much that has been explained by Dr. Carol Anderson, and I believe we need to reach a conclusion. If you were to talk about everything about White Rage, we wouldn't have enough time. Yes. So in the concluding section of this video, here is the summary. Dr. Carol Anderson's analysis of how the election of Barack Obama, the first African-American president of USA, served as a significant catalyst for an intensified expression of white rage. This one must have reached, you know,
The epitome of it.
How dare you become the president? Now you want to rule us?
Yes, sure.
No, you can't rule us. We're going to suppress you. But you know, fate is fate. And God is God. If he decided Obama is going to be this president of this time, he was going to be despite what?
True.
You know?
Yeah.
So Dr. Carol Anderson likely argues that Obama's very presence in the nation's highest office challenged deeply ingrained racial hierarchies and triggered a backlash among those who felt their privileged status threatened. This backlash, according to the summary's interpretation of Anderson's work, manifested in various forms, including concerted efforts at voter suppression aimed at disenfranchising minority voters and a resurgence of white supremacist ideologies, tragically exemplified by the violent action of Dylann Roof. There's a guy who was called Dylann Roof as well, right?
Sure.
So there's so much, but I think the white supremacists reached their epitome of anger
when President Obama was elected, because we understand that during this voting period, majority of the voters, majority of blacks came to vote. Also, the African Americans came to vote, which makes the white rage to escalate.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So guys, we're gonna end the video here. This is EFK Original Documentaries. Here is my boy Nix and the Diaspora. Be sure to check out Nick's channel. He's on YouTube as well. Please, bro, share your link on the description.
So you can find me at Nick and Diasporas there on YouTube, and you check what we offer you.
Yes. EFK, Nick and Diaspora. Thanks for watching. If you like what we do, kindly subscribe. You know, give us a super thanks. Become a member on Patreon. We shall surely appreciate.
Sure.
And see you in the next one.
Yeah.